for many days past. That we should give them nothing at all, and hold no intercourse with them whatever. We should therefore be afraid to give them anything, even if so disposed, for fear of the anger of the great medicine, who is not to be trifled with. Secondly, after the character just given the Sioux Tetons, we cannot think of employing them to row our boat. And thirdly, that it was a good thing for them, the Sioux, that our great medicine had not overheard their last query respecting the quote-unquote large green grasshopper. For in that case, it might have gone very hard with them, the Sioux. Our great medicine was anything but a large green grasshopper, and that they should soon see, to their cost, if they did not immediately go, the whole of them, about their business. Notwithstanding the imminent danger in which we were all placed, we could scarcely keep our countenances in beholding the air of profound admiration and astonishment with which the savages listened to these replies, and I believe that they would have immediately dispersed and left us to proceed on our voyage, had it not been for the unfortunate words in which I was informed that they were greater rascals than the Rickaries. This was apparently an insult to the last atrocity, and incited them to an uncontrollable degree of fury. We heard the words, "Rickery, Rickery," repeated every now and then with the utmost emphasis and excitement. And the whole band, as well as we could judge, seemed to be divided into two factions, the one urging the immense power of the great medicine, and the other outrageous insult of being called the greater rascals than the Rickaries. While matters stood thus, we retained our position in the middle of the stream, firmly resolved to give villains a dose of our canister shot upon the first indignity which should be offered us. Presently the interpreter on the gray horse came again in the river, and said that he believed we were no better than we should be, and that all the pale faces had previously gone up the river had been friends of the Sioux, and had made them large presents, that they, the Tetons, were determined not to let us proceed another step, unless we came on shore and gave all our fire guns and whiskey, with half our tobacco, that it was plain we were allies of the Rickery, who were now at war with the Sioux, and that our design was to carry them supplies, which we should not do. Lastly, that they did not think very much of their great medicine, for he had told us a lie in relation to the designs of the Tetons, and was positively nothing but a great green grasshopper, in spite of all that we thought to the contrary. These latter words about the great green grasshopper were taken up by the whole assemblage as the interpreter uttered them, and shouted at the top of our voice that the great medicine himself might be sure to hear the taunt. At the same time, they all broke into wild disorder, galloping their horses furiously in short circles, using contemptuous and indecent gesticulations, brandishing their spears and drawing their arrows to the head. I knew the next thing would be an attack, so determined to anticipate it at once before any of our party were wounded by the discharge of their weapons. There was nothing to be gained by delay, and everything by prompt and resolute action. As soon as a good opportunity presented itself, the word was given to fire, and instantly obeyed. The effect of the discharge was very severe, and answered all of our purposes to the full. 6 of the Indians were killed, and perhaps 3 times as many badly wounded. The rest were thrown into the greatest terror and confusion, and made off into the prairie at full speed. As we drew up our anchors, after reloading the gun, and pulled boldly in for the shore, by the time we had reached it, there was not an unwounded Teton within sight. I now left John Greeley with the 3 Canadians in charge of the boats, and landed with the rest of the men, and approaching the savage who was severely but not dangerously wounded, held a conversation with him by means of Jules. I told him the whites were well disposed to the Sioux, and to all Indian nations, that our sole object in visiting his country was to trap beaver and to see the beautiful region which had been given the red men by the Great Spirit, that when we procured as many furs as we wished, and seen all that we came to see, we should return home, that we had heard that the Sioux, and especially the Tetons, were a quarrelsome race, and that therefore we had brought with us our great medicine for protection, that he was now much exasperated with Tetons on account of their intolerable insult in calling him a green grasshopper, which he was not, and that I had had great difficulty in restraining him from a pursuit of the warriors who had fled, and from sacrificing the wounded who now lay around us, and that I had only succeeded in pacifying him by becoming personally responsible for the future good behavior of the savages. At this portion of my discourse, the poor fellow appeared much relieved and extended his hand in token of amity. I took it and assured him and his friends of my protection as long as we were unmolested, following up this promise by a present of 20 carats of tobacco, some small hardware, beads, and red flannel for himself and the rest of the wounded. While all this was going on, we kept a sharp lookout for the fugitive Sioux. As I concluded from making the presents, gangs of these were observable in the distance, and were evidently seen by the disabled savage, but I thought it best to pretend not to perceive them, and shortly afterwards returned to the boats. The whole interruption was detained us for 3 full hours, and it was after 3 o'clock when we once more started on our route. We made extraordinary haste, as I was anxious to get as far as possible from the scene of action before night. We had a strong wind at our back, and the current diminished in strength as we proceeded, owing to the widening of the stream. We therefore made great way, and by 9 o'clock we had reached a large and thickly wooded island near the northern bank, and close by the mouth of a creek. Here we resolved to encamp, and had scarcely set foot on shore when one of the Greelys shot and secured a fine buffalo, many of which were upon the place. After posting our sentries for the night, we had a hump of supper, with as much whiskey as was good for us. Our exploit of the day was then freely discussed, and by most of the men were treated as an excellent joke. But I could by no means enter into any merriment upon the subject. Human blood had never before this epoch had been shed at my hands, and although reason urged it, had been taken the wisest, and what would no doubt prove in the end the most merciful course, still conscious, refusing to hearken even reason herself, whispered pertinaciously within my ear, "It is human blood which thou hast shed." The hours wore on slowly, and I found it impossible to sleep. At length the morning dawned, and with it fresh dews, its fresher breezes and smiling flowers, there came a new courage and a bolder tone of thought, which enabled me to look more steadily upon what had been done, and to regard it in its only proper point of view, the urgent necessity of the deed. September 7th. Started early and made a great way with the strong cold wind from the east. Arrived at about noon at the upper gorge of what is called the Great Bend, a place where the river performs a circuit of 30 miles, and while by land the direct distance is not more than 1,500 yards. 6 miles beyond this is a creek of about 35 yards wide, coming in from the south. The country here is of peculiar character. On each side of the river, the shore is strewn thickly with round stones washed from the bluffs, and presenting a remarkable appearance for miles. The channel is very shallow and much interrupted with sandbars. Cedar here is met with more frequently than any other species of timber, and the prairies are covered with a stiff kind of prickly pear, over which our men found it no easy matter to balk in our moccasins. About sunset, in endeavoring to avoid a rapid channel, we had the misfortune to run the larboard side of the boat on the edge of the sandbar, which so heeled us over that which we were so very near getting filled with water, which was up to our armpits, and by main force held the sinking side up. But we were still in a dilemma, for our exertions were barely sufficient to keep from capsizing, and we could not spare a man to do anything towards pushing off. We were relieved, very unexpectedly, by the sinking of the whole sandbar from under the boat, just as we were upon the point of despair. The bed of the river in this neighborhood is very much obstructed by these shifting sands, which frequently change situations with great rapidity and without apparent cause. The material of the bars is a fine, hard yellow sand, which when dry is of a brilliant glass-like appearance, and almost impalpable. September 8th. We were still in the heart of the Texan country and kept a large, sharp lookout, stopping as seldom as possible, and then only upon the islands, which abounded with game in great variety: buffaloes, elk, deer, goat, black-tailed deer, and antelopes, with plover and brant of many kinds. The goats are uncommonly tame and have no beard. Fish is not so abundant here as lower down the river. A white wolf was killed by John Greeley in a ravine upon one of the smaller islands. Owing to the difficult navigation and the frequent necessity of employing the tow line, we did not make great progress this day. September 9th. Weather growing sensibly colder, which made us all anxious of pushing our way through the Sioux country, as it would be highly dangerous to form our winter encampment in their vicinity. We aroused ourselves to exertion and proceeded rapidly, the Canadians singing and shouting as we went. Now and then we saw in the extreme distance a solitary Teton, but no attempt was made to molest us, and we began to gather courage from this circumstance. Made 28 miles during the day. We encamped at night in high glee on a large island well stocked with game and thickly covered with cottonwood. We omit the adventures of Mr. Rodman from this period until the 10th of April. By the last of October, nothing of importance has happened. In the interval, the party made their way to a small creek, which they designated as Otter Creek, and proceeding up about a mile to an island well adapted for their purpose, built a log fort and took up their quarters for the winter. The location is just above an old Rickera villages. Several parties of these Indians visited the voyagers and behaved with perfect friendliness. They had heard of the skirmish with the Tetons, and the result of which hugely pleased them. No further trouble was experienced from any of the Sioux. The winter wore away pleasantly without accident of note. On the 10th of April, the party resumed their voyage.